Ashley, let's go to the hotline, and let's bring in the voice of the Texas Longhorns and the Texas High School Football Hall of Famer, my co-host on High School Scoreboard Live. We're joined by the great Craig Way. Craig, welcome back to the place where I feel like the playoffs make sense here, at least so far.
Yeah, I think so. And we talked about this earlier that normally we see the largest proliferation of upsets in the first 2 weeks, if for no other reason because the math sets it up that way, exponentially more opportunities for upsets. But even more so, the area round seems to provide more shockers than the by-district round, even though there are twice as many games. And a lot of that has to do with, as you know, teams that get in either with losing records or just aren't quite up to taking on a district champion. That said, what did you say it was? 18 4-seeds beat 1 seeds last week?
Yeah.
So it's not above the fray completely.
Certainly not. And you were, of course, watching from afar up there in Ames as the chaos unfolded before us in the by-district round of the Texas High School Football Playoffs. And I asked you on Friday night, I'll ask you again, is there one stunner, is there one result from Friday night that when it came across your purview made you sit up and pay attention a little bit more than the others?
You know, at the time, my first gut reaction, only because I'd just seen it a few minutes before, was Bruce Villetti falling to De Leon, but that wasn't nearly on the level, I think, of Lufkin and Texas High. Mm-hmm. To take nothing away from the Tigers, and they've been a tough out in some past playoff seasons, but I think Lufkin playing at home, being on the roll since the season opening loss to Longview. And again, this was something you and I talked about a week ago, both on your show and on my show and on the television show, that we said there's going to be one out there. There's going to be an outlier out there that we don't expect to see, and we might highlight certain matches. We highlighted Westlake Cibolo Steel. We highlighted some other games and said, hey, take a look at this. It's a really good first-round matchup, or potentially could be a first-round matchup. We highlighted Grandview and Rockdale and said, hey, keep an eye on that. And those two, by the way, wound up being a little more lopsided, although Westlake pulled away. And then we also added the proviso, somebody will pull a surprise that we're not expecting. Well, here you go, Texas High Tigers. So, that's the one, I think, when you step back after the smoke had cleared through the carnage, that we like to use that word, of the weekend, that's the one that's at the top of the list for me.
Well, and the thing that I kind of ended up coming away with is we had a lot of history-making wins on Friday night, over the course of the weekend. Some of which I think we had predicted. I think that Denton Braswell getting their first ever playoff victory is obviously noteworthy. But we had other games like Clint wins their first ever playoff game. They were 0-22 coming into that. Sabine wins their first ever playoff game. There you go. They hadn't won They had been playing since 1937. And then there is, and I think this is worth noting, is Pflugerville-Weiss. Pflugerville-Weiss, the Wolves go out there and after, were they 0-10 last year? Do I have that right?
They were 0-10 with no seniors. They played without seniors in that first, when you're lining up in that realignment. You got to make that call, and you know how it is, Tep, and there's different ways to go about it. Some coaches will say, we'll wait until the next realignment cycle so we can get some seniors in a class and get the program underfoot. And some programs choose to do that, and some just say, throw us into the fire. I think in the case of Tommy Albin's ball club, he was looking at it as a district in 13-5A Division II that he thought they might be able to contend. And they had several close losses last year. The thing was, they were all losses. So they wound up 0-10, and then coming back into this year, I know he was extremely confident that they could contend. They not only contended, they got a share of the district title, although they were the 2 seed because they head-to-head loss to Brenham. So I think they were very confident playing at home at the field in Pflugerville against Lockhart, and were able to get it done. Now remember, back a year ago, Tep, you had a first-year program in Leander Glenn, also from that district, but they had a senior class. They not only made the playoffs, they, too, won their by-district game. So Weiss is kind of following the blueprint, if you will, from a season ago with what Glenn did. And now Weiss gets Sherryland Pioneer with another opportunity perhaps to advance, although that's a really good team from the Valley they're facing this week.
This is, and that kind of speaks to me, one of the great joys of the first week of the Texas high school football playoffs. Not only are we unwrapping the present, and we talked about how it's 352 games, it's unlike any event in sports, but one of the great joys for me is that every time the playoffs roll around, you have these unbelievable stories that come out of here. And yeah, look, Pecos is not winning a title. I hate to break that to Eagles fans. Like, Pecos is probably not winning a state championship. But the fact that they were able to get their first playoff victory since 1975, it's those types of stories that, as much as we sit on here and we talk about what's next, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but as much as we talk about what's next, that in and of itself is worth celebrating. And that is, I think, one of the great joys of this job, is that you do get to celebrate those stories. Look, Eden is probably not winning a state championship, but they got their first ever 6-man playoff victory, and that's worth celebrating.
I think it really kind of falls upon our shoulders, yours with everything you and the staff do, and the great staff that you have at Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine, me, you, Rick Renner, our producer Patrick Mandrowski, and everybody at Fox Sports Southwest, that with what we present on High School Scoreboard Live on my own radio show here, it is, I think, kind of incumbent upon us, our responsibility to point these things out, to highlight these things, and to celebrate, as you mentioned, a Pecos win, to point out that Lexington could be the most dangerous 4-7 team you've ever seen. Yeah. That kind of thing coming up. I think it's on us to point those out. I'm not saying we're the guardians of the galaxy or anything, but I do think it's kind of important that we at least call attention to these games and these teams and say, hey, it's not all about North Shore and Duncanville and Allen and Katy and Judson and Westlake and Lake Travis and all them. Although we'll certainly have a plate full of all of that as we approach the holiday season, it's also about those schools. When I get asked, what's Texas high school football all about? I love all the 6A programs, and I love calling both 6A state championship games. But I also say, if you want some real flavor, go to Salina, go to Brownwood, go to some other places. You'll see it, you'll feel it, you'll taste it. I think we got a nice little taste of it last weekend. It's
Craig Way, the Texas High School Hall of Famer, joining us here on Texas Football Today. Get involved with the conversation, #TF Today. All right, so now it's on to the area round, and it gets harder. This game that we play with one another I'm going to make you pick a game that you're most interested in. It gets harder and harder. And like the degree of difficulty on both sides, me picking out a couple of games and then you having to finalize it, it's a dangerous game we play one another. So I will once again put it to you. I'll give you 3 games in 3 different classifications, and I'm going to make you pick one you're most interested in. At the 6A level, you can have Katy and Cy-Fair. At the 5A level, you can have A&M Consolidated and Fort Bend Marshall. And at the 4A level, I'll throw you a little bit of a wild card here. At the 4A level, you can have Beeville Jones and El Campo. Which of those are you most intrigued by? Because I think all 3 of those are really fun.
Absolutely, they are, and Hutto and Shadow Creek and Cedar Park and Friendswood. I mean, there's a couple other ones just to throw out there. I just got through waxing non-eloquently, I might add, probably about all the lower classifications and doing all that stuff. That said, Katy Cy-Fair really has my attention because we've been asking ourselves this question all season long. How good is Katy? Are they good enough to take out North Shore? They beat them early in the season. What happens if they get a rematch? Hey, they got to get to the rematch. They got to get there. And Epijowski's ball club is certainly more than capable of taking them out. That, to me, really stands out as one of the best matchups in the state of Texas. It certainly has my attention because while we're all kind of focusing on that next one, that one that would come down with Katy and North Shore, they got to get past Cy-Fair, and I think that one probably stands to me as one that's one of the most intriguing in Texas.
And finally, I'll ask you a little bit about teams in your neck of the woods. They're in the Austin area. Lake Travis gets by Smithson Valley. I don't think they're going to get any style points for it, but then again, it's a survive and advance. Westlake, an impressive win over Cibolo Steel in kind of a very 2019 Westlake way where the defense is really sensational. And then I think you look down in the Austin area in other places, and you had some surprises. We mentioned Mainer's win over Dripping Springs was a bit of a surprise. Overall, do you get the feeling that when you take a look at the Austin area, that anything has necessarily shifted, or does it still feel like Lake Travis, Westlake, and then maybe you could have a one or two surprises get deep in the playoffs?
Well, one thing I think is notable is that Westlake and Lake Travis both advanced in that old school, old style coaches thing of running game and defense. I asked Hank Carter about it this morning. I said, look, you did that with 160 rushing yards from Weston Stevens and a defense that allowed 3 points. I said, isn't that how coaches, especially an old defensive coach like yourself, like to do? He goes, I will take a playoff win any way imaginable. He said, which is a perfect coach's response, obviously. But he said, you like knowing that your ground game can do it, and given the injuries they've had with the running attack, that's more. And Westlake did it very similarly. Jackson Coker, their ground game has really started to come on in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So running game and defense, they say, travel. So they did it in very similar fashions, and we'll see if it holds up in their area round matchups going up. Obviously against Brennan for Westlake, and then obviously Madison for Lake Travis. Listen, the other team I continue to bang the drum about is Lampasas. Mm-hmm. And they're just northwest of the Austin area, and Ace Whitehead accounted 5 touchdowns last week. He does all of those things marvelously well, and I think they are a real threat in Region 4 and 4A Division 1, at least for a time anyway. And that's another one that I continue to say keep an eye on. Both Cedar Park and Hutto get supreme tests this week, especially Hutto taking on Shadow Creek. So that it's going to be difficult, I think, for those ball clubs.
He's Craig Way. He will have his eye on all 176 UIL Texas high school football games this weekend. Of course, listen to his fine work on the Horn in Austin, and catch him on Friday nights on your television on Fox Sports Southwest. Although this is the last Friday night one, because we moved to Saturday next week.
I like that. I like that because then we get all the results in, and you and I get to yakety yak about all the games and how the table is set for the following.
Craig, appreciate your time, my friend. I will see you on Friday.
Thanks, Tab.
There he goes, Craig Way, the Texas High School Football Hall of Famer, joins us every Tuesday here on Texas Football Today.